The fluorescent lights of the grocery store buzzed overhead, casting their harsh white glow on everything below. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when most people were still at work, but the store was busier than usual. Maybe it was the approaching storm that had everyone stocking up. Or maybe it was just one of those days when life pushes everyone into the same place at the same time. In the far corner, near the magazine rack that nobody really looked at anymore, a young boy sat on the floor with his back against the wall. He was 12 years old, though he looked smaller than that. His jacket, a faded blue thing that might have been nice once, hung on his thin frame with sleeves that stopped well above his wrists. When he stretched his legs out in front of him, you could see where his jeans had been let down at the hem, leaving a lighter line of fabric that showed they'd once been longer. His sneakers, white at some point in their life, were now gray with age and had patches of duct tape covering holes near the toes. The boy watched his mother at the checkout line. Her back bent slightly as she counted money from her worn purse. She was laying out dollar bills on the counter, smoothing each one carefully, her lips moving as she added up the total in her head. There were some coins too, and she was separating them into little piles. The cashier waited patiently, not rushing her, which was kind. The boy had seen other cashiers who would sigh or roll their eyes when his mother did this, and those moments made something hurt in his chest. He looked down at his shoes again. One of the tape patches was starting to peel. He pressed it back down with his finger, applying pressure to make it stick. These shoes had to last. They just had to. His mother had already told him they couldn't afford new ones until at least next month, maybe longer. He'd learned not to complain about things like that. Complaining didn't change anything except making his mother's face look more tired, and he hated seeing that look. Behind his mother in line stood a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a different world. Her coat was long and looked soft, the kind of soft that meant it cost more than a week of groceries. Her hair was done up perfectly, not a strand out of place, and her purse matched her shoes. Next to her was her son, a boy who looked about 8 years old, dressed in clothes that still had their shape and color. The boy was holding something, a toy robot, one of those fancy ones that probably cost $60 or $70, the kind the boy on the floor had seen in commercials and wished for in the quiet moments before sleep. Everything was normal for about 30 seconds. The woman was looking at her phone, occasionally glancing at the line ahead. Her son was examining his robot, turning it over in his hands, already imagining playing with it. The boy's mother was still counting her money, now checking her math a second time to make sure she had enough. Then something shifted. The woman put her phone in her purse and reached for the robot in her son's hands. "Put it back, sweetie. Not today." The boy could see the younger child's face change. It was like watching storm clouds roll in fast. His eyes got wide, then squinted. His mouth, which had been relaxed, tightened into a line. "But you said maybe," the young boy said, his voice rising. "I said maybe, and now I'm saying no. We're not getting it today. That's not fair." The woman's voice stayed calm but firm. "Life isn't always fair. Put it back." What happened next was something the boy on the floor had seen before, but never quite like this. The young boy's face turned red, really red, like a tomato left too long in the sun. He pulled the robot close to his chest and his mouth opened wide. Then he screamed. It wasn't a regular scream. It was the kind of scream that cut through every conversation in the store, that made heads turn from 3 aisles away, that seemed to bounce off the ceiling and walls and come at you from every direction. It was loud enough that the old man by the bread section actually dropped the loaf he was holding. "I want it! I want it! I want it!" Each word came out as its own explosion of sound. The boy on the floor winced. He saw his mother's shoulders tense up, saw her hand pause over her dollar bills. Everyone in the store was looking now. A couple of women near the produce section were whispering to each other. An older lady shook her head slowly. A young man with headphones actually took them off to see what was happening. The woman with the perfect hair and soft coat wasn't looking so perfect anymore. Her face had gone red too, but in a different way. It was the red of embarrassment, of being the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. She bent down, trying to keep her voice low and calm. "Stop this right now. We'll talk about this at home," but the boy wasn't having it. He threw himself on the floor, still clutching the robot, his legs kicking out. His shoes, expensive ones with lights in them, flashed with each kick. The screaming got louder, if that was even possible. "I hate you. You're the worst mom ever. Everyone else gets what they want." The boy watching from the corner felt something strange in his chest. It wasn't anger exactly, though there was some of that. It wasn't jealousy, though that was there too. It was something more complicated, something he didn't have the right words for yet. He thought about the toy dinosaur he'd wanted when he was 9. He'd seen it in a shop window every day on his way home from school. It was green and detailed, with joints that moved and eyes that looked almost real. He'd wanted it so badly that he'd started doing odd jobs around the neighborhood. He'd raked leaves for Mrs. Chen next door. He'd helped Mr. Rodriguez carry his groceries up 3 flights of stairs. He'd collected bottles and cans for the 5-cent return. It had taken him 7 months to save up the $40 he needed. 7 months of hoping the dinosaur would still be there, of walking past that window and checking, of counting his money every week. When he finally had enough, he'd gone to the store with his money clutched in his hand, so excited he could barely breathe. But that same week, his mother had gotten sick. Really sick. She'd missed 3 days of work, which meant 3 days of no pay. The bills had piled up on the kitchen table, looking scary and official. His mother had sat at that table with her head in her hands, and he'd seen her shoulders shake in that way that meant she was crying but trying to hide it. He'd taken his $40 out of his drawer and put it on the table next to the bills. He didn't say anything, just left it there and went to his room. The next day, his mother had held him so tight he could barely breathe, and she'd whispered thank you over and over into his hair. He'd never gotten that dinosaur. The screaming in the store continued, pulling him back to the present. The woman was trying everything now. She was reasoning with her son, explaining that he had plenty of toys at home. She was promising him they could come back another day. She was even trying to offer him other things, smaller things if he would just please stop screaming. Nothing worked. The boy on the floor watched as tears started running down the woman's face. She looked around at all the people watching, and he could see how small she felt, how helpless. Her son was thrashing on the floor now, his nice clothes getting dirty from the grocery store tile, his face wet with tears and snot, completely lost in his tantrum. The boy stood up slowly. His knees cracked a little from sitting so long. He brushed off the back of his jeans, though they'd been dirty before he sat down anyway. His mother was still at the checkout, but he could see her watching him now, a question in her eyes. He took a deep breath and started walking toward the screaming boy and his crying mother. His taped-up sneakers squeaked a little on the clean floor. His 2 short jacket sleeves rose up even more as he walked, showing his thin wrists. He had no idea if this would work. He had no plan, really, but something in him said he had to try. As the boy walked closer, the screaming seemed to get even louder, if that was possible. The young child on the floor was in full meltdown mode now, his face purple, his voice going hoarse from all the yelling. People had stopped even pretending to shop. Everyone was either staring openly or trying very hard to look like they weren't, staring while absolutely staring. The boy could hear whispers floating around him as he walked. Kids these days have no discipline. I would never let my child act like that. She's too soft on him. That's the problem. He wanted to tell them to stop. They didn't know anything about this woman or her son. They didn't know what kind of day she'd had, or what she was dealing with, or why this moment had broken something in her child. But he was 12 and they were adults, so he kept his mouth shut and kept walking. The woman hadn't noticed him yet. She was too focused on her son, trying to pick him up off the floor while he went completely limp and heavy the way kids do when they don't want to be moved. It was like trying to lift a sack of potatoes that was also screaming. Please, honey, please. Everyone's watching. Please just calm down. But begging wasn't working. The boy could have told her that. He'd seen enough tantrums in his life, at school, at the park, and other stores. Begging never worked. It just made the kid feel more powerful, more in control. And this kid already felt like he had all the control in the world. The boy stopped a few feet away, just standing there quietly. He wasn't sure what to do with his hands, so he shoved them in his jacket pockets. One of the pockets had a hole in it and his finger poked through. He could feel the worn lining of the jacket against his skin. He thought about his own life, about all the times he'd wanted to scream just like this kid was screaming. There'd been so many moments, when his dad left and never came back, when the kids at school made fun of his taped-up shoes, when he was hungry but there wasn't enough food for seconds, when he heard his mother crying in her room at night, trying to be quiet so he wouldn't hear. He'd wanted to throw himself on the floor and scream that it wasn't fair, that other kids had dads who stayed, That other kids had new shoes and full lunches and mothers who didn't have to work 2 jobs. That other kids got to be kids without worrying about money or bills or whether the lights would get turned off again. But he never did. Not once. It wasn't because he was a saint or because he was naturally well-behaved. It was simpler than that, really. He'd figured out early on that throwing a tantrum wouldn't change anything. His dad would still be gone. The shoes would still be old. The refrigerator would still be mostly empty. All a tantrum would do is make his mother feel worse, and she already carried enough weight on her shoulders. So he'd learned to swallow it down. To want things quietly. To be disappointed in private. To understand that no meant no because there was no other option. Not because his mother didn't love him. Looking at this kid on the floor, red-faced and screaming over a toy robot, the boy felt something complicated twist in his chest. Part of him was annoyed. Part of him was sad. Part of him was even a little jealous. This kid had so much that he didn't even realize what he had. He had a mother who could probably afford that robot if she really wanted to buy it. She was saying no to teach him something, not because her bank account was nearly empty. But there was another part of him too, a part that felt sorry for the kid, because this child didn't know yet. He didn't know that life could be hard. He didn't know that some people had real problems, real things to scream about. He was lucky, actually, that the biggest crisis in his life right now was not getting a toy. The boy remembered being that innocent once before his dad left, before money got tight. It was a nice way to live, even if you didn't appreciate it at the time. The woman finally noticed him standing there. She looked up, her makeup smeared from tears, her perfect hair coming loose from its style. For a second, she looked almost afraid, like she thought he might judge her too, might add his voice to all the others silently criticizing her parenting. But the boy didn't say anything to her, not yet. Instead, he took another step closer and then did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He slowly sat down on the floor right there in the middle of the grocery store, a few feet away from the screaming child. The woman blinked, confused. A couple of the watching shoppers looked at each other, wondering what was happening now. The boy just sat there, cross-legged, his taped-up sneakers visible in front of him, waiting. He wasn't in a hurry. He'd learned patience in a hard school, the school of having no choice but to wait, waiting for his mother to come home from work, waiting for the next paycheck, waiting for better days that sometimes came and sometimes didn't. The screaming continued for another minute, maybe 2. But something about the boy sitting there, calm and quiet, started to change the energy in the air. The young child's screams were still loud, but they were losing some of their steam. You could hear him starting to run out of breath, starting to tire himself out. The boy pulled his hand out of his pocket, the one without the hole. In his palm was a small toy car. It was old, probably older than he was. The red paint was chipped off in places, showing silver metal underneath. One of the wheels was slightly crooked. The windshield had a tiny crack in it. But it was clearly loved, clearly treasured. You could tell by how smooth it was, worn down by countless hours of being held and played with. He turned it over in his hand slowly, running his thumb over the familiar bumps and scratches. This car had been his companion for years. It had been in his pocket during his first day at a new school. It had been under his pillow on the nights when he missed his father so badly it hurt. It had been his lucky charm, his comfort object, his connection to a past that felt both very far away and very close. His mother had told him the story 100 times. The car had belonged to his father. It was one of the only things he'd left behind when he walked out. His mother had found it under the couch weeks after he left, probably fallen out of his pocket without him noticing. She'd almost thrown it away, but something made her keep it. On the boy's 6th birthday, when money was too tight for presents, she'd given it to him and told him it had been his father's favorite toy as a kid. He didn't know if that was true. He suspected his mother might have made up that part to make him feel better. But it didn't matter. The car was special because it was all he had. It represented something he could hold on to, something solid in a life that often felt shaky and uncertain. The screaming had gotten quieter now. The young child was in that phase of a tantrum where the energy is running out, but the emotions are still raw. He was making hiccuping sounds, his chest heaving, tears and snot running down his face. The boy held the car up slightly, letting the fluorescent lights catch on its chipped paint. He didn't look at the young child directly. He just studied his car like it was the most interesting thing in the world. "This was my dad's," he said softly. His voice wasn't loud, but in the relative quiet of the store, with everyone holding their breath to see what would happen, it carried. The young child hiccuped again. His crying slowed down just a little. Through his tears, his eyes focused on the car in the older boy's hand. The boy continued, still not looking directly at the younger child. He left it behind when he left us. It's the only thing I have from him. The woman covered her mouth with her hand. The boy could see her eyes filling with fresh tears, but different ones now. It's not worth much, the boy went on, turning the car over slowly. Maybe $1 at a yard sale. Maybe less. But it's my favorite thing in the whole world. The young child had stopped screaming completely now. He was still lying on the floor, still holding his expensive robot, but he was listening, really listening. The boy finally looked at him, making eye contact for the first time. The younger child's eyes were red and swollen, his face still blotchy. But he was quiet, waiting. And the older boy knew he had one chance to say something that might actually matter. The boy looked at the younger child, really looked at him. He saw a kid who probably had a room full of toys. A kid who'd never worn shoes with tape on them. A kid who'd never had to choose between buying something he wanted and helping his mom pay the electric bill. But he also saw a kid who was hurting, even if that hurt came from a place of privilege that the older boy couldn't quite understand. "That robot's really cool," the boy said, his voice still quiet but steady. "I've seen the commercials for it. It does all those tricks, right? The flips and stuff?" The young child sniffled and nodded, loosening his grip on the toy just slightly. His breathing was still uneven, but at least he wasn't screaming anymore. "I wanted one too when I first saw it," the boy admitted. He smiled a little, but it was a sad kind of smile. "I want a lot of things, actually. There's this backpack at school, the kind with lots of pockets and good straps. Mine has a broken zipper and a hole in the bottom. I have to be careful not to put anything important in it or it falls right through." A couple of the watching adults shifted uncomfortably. The boy wasn't saying this for pity. He was just stating facts the way you'd say the sky is blue or water is wet. "I wanted new shoes too," he continued, glancing down at his taped-up sneakers. "These used to belong to my cousin. He outgrew them and gave them to me 2 years ago. They've got holes now and they're too small, but they still work. Mostly." The young child was sitting up now, still on the floor, but no longer thrashing or kicking. He was listening, his robot clutched in his arms, but not quite as tightly. His mother had backed up a step, giving the older boy space to work whatever magic he was working. "The thing is," the boy said, and now he did look directly at the younger child, "I've learned something, and it's taken me a long time to learn it, so maybe I can save you some time." He held up the little toy car again, letting it catch the light. "Your mom isn't saying no because she doesn't love you. I know it feels like that. I used to think that too when I was younger. I'd think if she really loved me, she'd get me what I want. But that's not how it works." The young child's bottom lip trembled, but he didn't start crying again. He was really listening now, hanging on every word. "She's saying no because she loves you enough to teach you something important, something I had to learn the hard way." The boy paused, choosing his words carefully. "Not everything worth having comes easy, and having everything you want right when you want it doesn't actually make you happy. It just makes you want more things." The woman let out a small sound, something between a sob and a laugh. She pressed her hand harder against her mouth. The boy kept going. "I wanted a toy dinosaur once. A big one, green, with moving parts. I saved up for 7 months doing little jobs around the neighborhood. 7 months. I'd walk past the store window every single day to make sure it was still there. When I finally had enough money, I was so excited I could barely sleep the night before." The young child leaned forward slightly, interested despite himself. "Did you get it?" "No," the boy said simply. "My mom got sick and missed work. We needed the money for other things. Important things like food and keeping the lights on. So I gave her the money I'd saved." "That's not fair," the young child said, and for the first time there was something in his voice besides anger. "It was sympathy. You're right. It wasn't fair," the boy agreed. "But you know what? I learned something from not getting that dinosaur that was more valuable than the toy itself." "What?" The boy held up his little car again. "I learned that the things that matter most aren't the things you buy. This car isn't worth anything to anyone else, but to me it's priceless, not because it's fancy or expensive, but because of what it represents. It's a connection to my dad even though he's not around. It's a reminder that even small things can be important if you treat them that way." He scooted a tiny bit closer to the young child. Close enough that they were almost sitting together now. That robot in your hands is just plastic and metal and computer chips. Tomorrow there'll be a newer version. Next month something even cooler will come out. But the lesson your mom is trying to teach you today, that's something that'll last your whole life. The young child looked down at the robot in his arms. For the first time since the tantrum started, he seemed to really see it. Not as this magical thing he had to have, but just as a toy. One of many toys. Something that would be fun for a while and then probably end up forgotten in a closet somewhere. What lesson? He asked quietly. The boy thought about how to put it into words this kid would understand. He'd never been great with words. He was better at math, at fixing things, at figuring out how stuff worked. But this felt important, so he tried his best. That you can't always get what you want, and that's okay. It doesn't mean people don't love you. It doesn't mean you're not special. It just means that life doesn't revolve around getting stuff. He paused, and that sometimes the word no is a gift even though it doesn't feel like it at the time. How is no a gift? The young child's voice was still skeptical, but the anger was gone. He was genuinely asking, because it teaches you to appreciate what you do have. It teaches you patience. It teaches you that you're strong enough to handle disappointment. And most importantly, the boy said, glancing up at the woman who was now openly crying, it teaches you that your mom loves you enough to give you what you need, even when it's not what you want. The store was completely silent now. Even the background music seemed to have stopped, though that was probably just everyone's imagination. The boy could feel dozens of eyes on him, but he didn't care anymore. He was focused on this one kid, on this one moment. The young child looked at the robot, then at the toy car in the older boy's hand, then up at his mother. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time since the tantrum started. He saw her smeared makeup, her disheveled hair, her red eyes. He saw how exhausted she looked, how sad, how worried. Something shifted in his young face. The anger that had twisted his features into something ugly was fading away, replaced by something else. Understanding, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. He was only 8 years old. He couldn't fully grasp everything the older boy had said. But he understood enough. Slowly, carefully, he stood up. His legs were shaky from all the thrashing and crying. His nice clothes were dirty from the floor. His face was a mess of tears and snot, but he was calm now. He held the robot out in front of him, looking at it one more time. Then he turned and walked to the shelf where the toys were displayed. It was only about 10 feet away, but it felt like a much longer journey. Everyone watched as he carefully, almost reverently, placed the robot back on the shelf where it belonged. He stood there for a moment, his hand still on the toy like he was saying goodbye to a dream. Then he let go. He turned back to his mother and his voice came out small and broken and real. "I'm sorry, Mom." The woman dropped to her knees right there in the middle of the grocery store and pulled her son into her arms. She was sobbing now, really sobbing, holding him like she'd never let go. The boy hugged her back and he was crying too. But different tears now. Not angry tears, not frustrated tears. Something cleaner, something that felt like relief. The older boy stood up quietly, brushing off his jeans. His part in this was done. He'd said what he needed to say. He started to walk back to where his mother was waiting, the small toy car clutched in his hand. But the woman's voice stopped him. "Wait. Please wait." The boy stopped and turned around. The woman was standing now, her son still wrapped in her arms, but she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It was intense, though, like she was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. Not just a poor kid in old clothes, but a whole person with depth and wisdom beyond his years. "I need to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup even more, but she didn't seem to care anymore. "What you just did, what you just said to my son, I've been trying to teach him that for years. Years. And in 5 minutes, you got through to him in a way I never could." The boy shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. At school, he was the quiet kid who sat in the back. At home, he tried to be invisible so he wouldn't add to his mother's worries. Being noticed, being praised, it made him feel exposed somehow. "I just told him what I know," he said quietly. "It's not that big a deal." "It is a big deal," the woman insisted. She knelt down beside her son, one hand on his shoulder, and used her other hand to gesture the older boy closer. "Come here, please. I want to talk to you properly." The boy walked over slowly, his sneakers squeaking on the floor. He could feel everyone still watching. The cashiers had stopped scanning groceries. The other customers had abandoned any pretense of shopping. They were all invested in this moment now, this strange and beautiful thing unfolding in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. When he got close enough, the woman looked him right in the eyes. Hers were blue, he noticed, and still wet with tears. But there was something else in them, too. Respect, maybe, or recognition, like she was seeing something in him that most adults missed. "How old are you?" she asked. 12. She shook her head slowly, like she couldn't quite believe it. 12 years old, and you have more wisdom than most adults I know, including me. She glanced at her son, who was watching the exchange with curious eyes. "Where did you learn to be like this?" The boy didn't know how to answer that. He hadn't learned it anywhere, not really. There was no class in school called How to Be Poor with Dignity. No one had sat him down and explained the philosophy of making peace with disappointment. He'd just lived it, day after day, year after year, until it became part of who he was. "I guess I just learned from watching my mom," he finally said. "She works really hard. 2 jobs, sometimes 3. And she never complains, not really. She just does what needs to be done. If I threw tantrums every time we couldn't afford something, it would just make everything harder for her." The woman's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Your mother raised an incredible young man." From across the store by the checkout counter, the boy's mother had been watching everything unfold. She'd finished paying for their groceries, counting out every last dollar and coin, and now she stood with their 2 bags in her hands, pride written all over her tired face. When she heard the woman's words, she smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made her look younger, less worn down by life. The woman stood up again, and the boy could see her mind working, processing something. She pulled her son closer to her side. "I want you to meet someone properly," she said to her son. Then to the older boy, "I'm sorry, I didn't even ask your name," he told her, and she repeated it like she wanted to remember it. Then she told him her name and her son's name, and they all stood there in this awkward little triangle, surrounded by strangers who were pretending not to listen but absolutely listening to every word. "My son has everything," the woman said, and there was no pride in her voice when she said it. Just sadness. "Every toy he asks for, every game, every gadget. We have money. His father and I both have good jobs. We live in a nice house in a nice neighborhood, and I thought I was being a good mother by giving him everything he wanted." She looked down at her son, who had the decency to look a bit ashamed. "But I realize now that I've been failing him. I've been giving him things instead of lessons, stuff instead of character. And somehow you figured out what I've been too blind to see, that the best things in life aren't things at all." The boy didn't know what to say to that. It felt like she was giving him credit for something that wasn't really his doing. He was just trying to help, trying to stop the screaming because it made him feel uncomfortable. He hadn't meant to deliver some big life lesson. But before he could respond, the woman did something unexpected. She reached into her expensive purse, the one that matched her shoes, and pulled out a business card. It was fancy, printed on thick paper with embossed lettering. She held it out to him. "This is my card. I own a business downtown, a marketing firm. I'm telling you this because I want to do something for you and your mother." The boy took the card but didn't look at it. He was too busy feeling uncomfortable again. He didn't want charity. He'd done what he did because it felt right, not because he wanted something in return. The woman seemed to sense his discomfort. "I'm not trying to give you a handout. Please don't think that. I want to offer your mother a job." That got his attention. He looked up at her, surprised. "I'm serious," she continued. "We're always looking for good people. People with integrity, with work ethic, with character. And if your mother raised someone like you, then she's exactly the kind of person I want working with me." She paused. "The pay is good, better than most places. And there are benefits too. Health insurance, dental, all of that." The boy's heart started beating faster. Health insurance. His mother had been putting off going to the doctor for months because they couldn't afford it. She had this cough that wouldn't go away, and it worried him every time he heard it. "I don't know if she'd want to," he said carefully. He didn't want to get his hopes up. He'd learned that lesson too. "She's got jobs already. Have her call me. Just to talk, no pressure. If she's interested, we'll figure something out. And even if the timing isn't right, maybe I can help in some other way." The woman looked at him seriously. "I mean it. I want to help." The boy's mother had started walking over now, sensing that something important was happening. She still carried their grocery bags, but she set them down when she got close. She looked between her son and this well-dressed woman, trying to understand what was going on. The woman turned to her and extended her hand. "You have an extraordinary son. I hope you know that." The boy's mother shook her hand, looking confused but pleased. "Thank you. He's my whole world. He just taught my son a lesson I've been failing to teach him for 8 years. He helped us both, actually." The woman launched into an explanation, telling the mother everything that had happened. How the older boy had calmed her son's tantrum with nothing but wisdom and kindness. As she talked, the boy watched his mother's face. He saw the surprise there, then the pride, then something else. Tears. His mother was trying not to cry, but she was failing. She kept blinking rapidly, trying to hold it back, but a few tears escaped anyway. When the woman finished her story and mentioned the job offer, the boy's mother actually gasped. Her hand went to her chest like she needed to steady herself. "I couldn't," she said automatically. "That's too much. We don't need charity." "It's not charity," the woman said firmly. "It's an opportunity. You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. Call me." She gestured to the business card in the boy's hand. "Please, I'd be lucky to have someone like you on my team." The young boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, can we be friends with them?" His mother looked down at him, surprised by the question. Just 20 minutes ago, he'd been screaming on the floor. Now he was asking about friendship. "I think that would be nice," she said softly, running her hand through his messy hair. "If they want to be friends with us." The older boy's mother looked at him, asking the question with her eyes. He thought about it. This kid was from a completely different world. They probably didn't have anything in common, but maybe that was the point. Maybe that's exactly why they should be friends. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "That would be okay." The woman smiled, really smiled, for the first time since this whole thing began. "My son could learn a lot from you, and honestly, I think we all could." People in the store had started to move again, going back to their shopping, but the boy could still feel them watching out of the corners of their eyes. Some of them were smiling. One older lady was wiping her eyes with a tissue. Even the cashiers looked moved. The boy's mother picked up their grocery bags again. "We should probably get going. The frozen things are going to melt." But the woman stopped them one more time. "Wait, one more thing." She reached into her purse again and pulled out some cash. Before either of them could protest, she pressed it into the mother's hand. "Please let me buy you both dinner tonight. Something nice. You deserve it." The boy's mother looked at the money, then at the woman, then at her son. The boy gave her a small nod. It was okay to accept help sometimes. That was a lesson too. "Thank you," his mother said quietly. "Really, thank you." As they walked toward the exit, the boy's mother put her arm around his shoulders and pulled him close. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. So proud. The boy didn't say anything. He just leaned into her side and let himself feel good about what had happened. For once, just for today, things had gone right. 3 months had passed since that day in the grocery store, and the world looked different now. Not completely different, but different enough that the boy sometimes had to remind himself it was real. His mother had called the number on that business card. She'd been nervous about it, practicing what she'd say for 2 days before finally dialing. The conversation had lasted 20 minutes, and when she hung up, she'd had an interview scheduled for the following week. The boy remembered how she'd paced around their small apartment that whole week, rehearsing answers to questions she thought they might ask, ironing and re-ironing her one good blouse. She'd gotten the job. The pay was almost double what she'd been making at her 2 previous jobs combined. More importantly, there were benefits, real benefits. Health insurance that actually covered things. Dental. Even vision, which meant the boy could finally get glasses to help with the headaches he'd been having when he read. They still lived in the same apartment. His mother said they needed to save money first, build up a cushion for emergencies. The boy understood. You didn't forget what it was like to be poor just because you got a better job. That lesson stuck with you, kept you careful, kept you smart about money. But small things had changed. The refrigerator had food in it now, real food, not just whatever was on sale. His mother had taken him shopping for new shoes, actual new ones from the store, not hand-me-downs from his cousin. He'd picked out a pair of sneakers that fit properly, and when they'd walked out of the store, he'd felt like he was floating. No tape needed, no holes. Just solid new shoes that were his and his alone. She'd also bought him that backpack he'd mentioned, the one with good zippers and no holes in the bottom. It was dark blue with gray straps and it had more pockets than he knew what to do with. He'd spent a whole evening just organizing his school stuff in all those different compartments, enjoying the simple luxury of a bag that worked the way it was supposed to. But the biggest change wasn't the stuff. It was his mother. She smiled more now. The lines around her eyes had softened. She didn't come home exhausted every night, dragging herself through the door like every step hurt. She had energy now. Time. She'd even started cooking real dinners again instead of just heating up whatever was quick and cheap. Last week, she'd gone to the doctor for the first time in 3 years. They'd given her medicine for that cough, and it was finally going away. Every night, the boy fell asleep grateful for the silence, for the absence of that harsh sound that had worried him for so long. The woman from the store, his mother's new boss, had kept her word about other things too. She'd invited them over for dinner twice. The first time, the boy had been nervous. Their house was huge, the kind of place he'd only seen in movies. It had a staircase that curved, a kitchen bigger than his entire apartment, and a backyard with actual grass and a swing set. But the woman and her family had been kind. Not fake kind, not charity kind, but genuinely warm. They'd made his mother feel welcome, and they'd treated the boy like a regular kid, not some poor child they were doing a favor for. The young boy, the one who'd thrown the tantrum, was different now too. Not completely different because people don't change overnight, but better. He still had moments where he wanted things, where he got frustrated, but he was learning. Slowly, he was learning. The two boys had started hanging out sometimes. It was strange at first. They didn't have much in common on the surface. The younger boy had a room full of toys and video game systems. He went to a private school. His clothes were always new and perfectly fitted. But underneath all that, they'd found things to talk about. They both liked the same movies. They both thought math was boring, but science was cool. They both worried about disappointing their mothers. The older boy had gone to the younger boy's house a few times. It was weird being in a place so big, so full of stuff. The first time he'd used their bathroom, he'd counted 3 different kinds of soap. 3. In his apartment, they had 1 bar of soap that they used for everything, and they made it last as long as possible. But he didn't feel jealous anymore, not the way he used to. Maybe it was because his own life had gotten a little easier. Or maybe it was because he'd learned that having more stuff didn't automatically make you happier. The younger boy had everything, but he'd been miserable that day in the store. The older boy had almost nothing, but he'd had something more valuable: perspective. Today was Saturday, and the younger boy was coming over to the older boy's apartment for the first time. His mother was driving him over, and the older boy was nervous. Their apartment was tiny compared to the younger boy's house. The furniture was old, mismatched stuff from thrift stores and yard sales. The carpet had stains that wouldn't come out no matter how much his mother scrubbed. The walls needed paint. The boy had spent the morning cleaning, making sure everything looked as nice as possible. His mother had helped, and she'd tried to tell him not to worry, that real friends didn't care about stuff like that. But he still worried. When the doorbell rang, his heart jumped. He opened the door, and there stood the younger boy with his mother behind him. The woman smiled at him warmly. "Thank you for inviting us," she said. "We brought some snacks." She held up a bag. The older boy's mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. The two women hugged, which still felt a little strange to the boy. His mother's boss was now also her friend, and that took some getting used to. The younger boy looked around the apartment with curious eyes, and the older boy held his breath, waiting for judgment. "But it didn't come. Your room is this way?" the younger boy asked, pointing down the short hallway. "Yeah. Cool. Can we play that card game you told me about?" Just like that, they were in his room, sitting on his floor with a worn deck of cards between them. The younger boy didn't mention the size of the room, or the fact that the bed was just a mattress on a frame, or that there was no TV or game system. He just shuffled the cards and started dealing. They played for a while, and through the thin walls, the boy could hear their mothers talking in the living room. They were laughing about something at work, and the sound made him feel warm inside. His mother's laugh had been rare for so long. Hearing it come easily now, often now, that was worth more than any toy or game or thing. "Can I ask you something?" the younger boy said suddenly, putting down his cards. Sure. That day at the store when you sat down and talked to me. Were you scared? I mean, I was being pretty crazy. The older boy thought about it. A little. Not of you exactly. More scared that I'd say the wrong thing and make it worse. Why did you do it then? It was a good question. And the boy wasn't sure he'd ever really thought about the answer before. I guess because I knew how your mom felt. My mom gets that same look sometimes, like she's trying so hard but nothing's working. I hate seeing that look. So when I saw it on your mom's face, I just wanted to help. The younger boy nodded slowly. I was a real brat that day. Yeah, you kind of were, the older boy agreed, but he said it with a smile. I'm sorry. Not to you. I mean, I'm sorry to you too, but mostly I'm sorry to my mom. She's been trying to teach me stuff my whole life, and I never listened. It took a stranger sitting on the floor with a beat-up toy car to get through to me. He paused. That's kind of embarrassing. Sometimes we hear things better from people who aren't our parents. That's normal. You're pretty smart, you know that? The older boy shrugged. I just pay attention. When you don't have much, you learn to appreciate what you do have, and you learn to see things clearly because you can't hide behind stuff. They went back to their card game, and the afternoon drifted by, easy and comfortable. At one point, the mothers came in with sandwiches and juice, and they all ate together in the small room. It was crowded with 4 people in there, but it felt good. It felt right. When it was time to leave, the younger boy didn't want to go. Can I come back next week? He asked. Sure, the older boy said. If you want to. I do. And hey, next time maybe you can come to my house and we can play video games or something. That'd be cool. At the door, the woman pulled the older boy aside for a moment while her son said goodbye to his mother. You changed our lives, you know that? Not just by helping my son that day, but by showing me what real character looks like. You and your mother both. The boy felt his face get hot. He still wasn't good with compliments. You changed our lives too. My mom is so much happier now. She's an incredible employee. Best hire I've made in years, she smiled. But more than that, she's become a real friend. That's rare in this world. After they left, the boy and his mother stood together in their small living room. She put her arm around his shoulders and kissed the top of his head. I'm proud of who you are, she said quietly. Not just what you did that day in the store, but who you are every single day. You're kind and wise and strong. You're everything I hoped you'd be. The boy leaned into her side. He still carried that little toy car in his pocket every day. His father's car. The one thing connecting him to a man he barely remembered. But he was learning that connections could be built in other ways too. Through kindness. Through friendship. Through helping someone else learn a lesson you'd already learned the hard way. Life wasn't perfect. They still had bills to worry about. Money was still tight some months. The apartment was still small. But they had enough now. More importantly, they had each other, and they'd built something new with people they'd met in the most unlikely way. Sometimes the boy thought about that day, about how close he'd come to just staying in his corner, staying quiet, not getting involved. If he'd made that choice, everything would be different now. His mother would still be working 2 jobs. They'd still be counting pennies at the grocery store. The younger boy would still be learning the wrong lessons. One simple act, done because it felt right, had changed everything. And as he stood there in their small apartment, his mother's arm around him, the smell of dinner cooking, the sound of her humming quietly to herself, he understood something important. The richest he'd ever felt in his life wasn't now, with new shoes and a full refrigerator. It was that moment on the grocery store floor, holding his father's beat-up toy car, knowing he had something real to offer someone who seemed to have everything. That moment when he'd been poor in money but rich in spirit, that was real wealth. Everything else was just a bonus.